Hello everyone and welcome back in to the final segment of the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast for today. And we'll be talking about a top half of the table clash in the Premier League that could determine the legitimacy of both of these respective teams' chances of contending for the top six. Aston Villa taking on Chelsea this weekend in the Premier League. And this is a very interesting game because both of these teams are not necessarily in the best form. Chelsea, 2 losses to Brighton, 1 in the FA Cup, 1 in the league, that see them kind of mired in inconsistency. And Aston Villa not winning a Premier League game since a 1-0 win over Everton just over a month ago. So both of these teams heading into this game not necessarily in the best form, even in cup competition either. And so we're starting to begin to question how these teams profile in the title race, but most importantly, how they profile in the top six race, because actually neither of them are going to contend for the title, in fact, because of their form. And they're really going to have to focus on winning in the Premier League to truly contend the top six, because right now, in the Champions League at the very least, I don't really think Villa will be competitive, and Chelsea should really be more concerned with developing consistent starting 11, planning for the summer, rather than worry about the Europa Conference League, which in all reality doesn't mean anything if you win it, in my humble opinion. But without further ado, let's jump right into this game and how I think both of these teams can look at this one. Right now, Aston Villa are slowly falling down the table. They actually have the worst goal differential at -3 of anyone in the top half of the table. So their backs are truly up against it. Chelsea, have been kind of in enough form to where they can still say they're within reach of the top four. But to me, maintaining, say, top six, fifth status will be best for them, because both of these teams, in my opinion, still need a lot more. And it's the moves they made in the January transfer window that I think find themselves in this spot. Last result was not necessarily a result that we can expect to see this weekend, because Chelsea blew Villa out of the water, 3-0. Jackson, Fernandez, and Palmer were the goal scorers in that one. This one I feel like will be a much more tense affair, because both these teams will be trying hard not to lose, trying hard, to try and get positives out of this game. But in all reality, when you look at these two teams, you look at how they were expected to perform this season compared to where they are now. Villa is very disappointing, whereas compared to the start of the season, a result like their last result against Chelsea would have been embarrassing to them, because they were actually performing well. But a big reason as to why they were performing well was the performances of John Duran, and now they let him walk inexplicably to Saudi. And I know that you feel, if you're Unai Emery, if you're this Aston Villa organization, if you're the players, that you have enough in your front line to compete without John Duran. He was a spark plug for you, man. He was someone who would come in as a substitute no matter what minute, what urgency was required of Aston Villa in the game, and get the job done for them. And so losing that really gives Aston Villa this kind of bad taste in their mouth. Like, they let John Duran go to Saudi, not necessarily for that much money either, and now they're failing to score, at very least in the Premier League, in front of net, resulting in them steadily dropping down the standings to the point where we could say they might not even be in top contention. Whereas Chelsea, to me, they're a team that are weird to figure, just because they are humdrum right now and how they're going about things. I don't necessarily think they're willing to take cup competition seriously, so we would think that they will be taking the Premier League more seriously, but they're barely kind of staying afloat in the Premier League. I'm just going to check their run of form right now to make sure that I'm getting a lot of things right. They did have a win over West Ham a couple weeks ago, but they got blown away by, Brighton twice now, to the point where you feel like this Chelsea team is just watching these younger teams, more willing teams go by them in the standings. But they are more than the sum of their parts. However, the question that's consistently asked of Chelsea is, well, are you going to get legitimate players that can be clinical for you at important times of asking? Because right now, they are becoming a little bit too Palmer-centric in my opinion, and the players who are performing at an elite level to start the season, gaining in confidence, guys like Cucurella, guys like Madueke, guys even like Gusto, guys like Jackson at the top, guys like Fernandes in the midfield, who they invested so much in, has slowly started to decline as well. And so, headed into this matchup, this Chelsea team just needs to look for answers in how they can continue to improve this starting 11, but also start to think of their long-term future. Not to say that they should completely abandon hope of competing for a top 6 or 5 spot, because right now the Premier League holds all the cards in gaining that extra place in cup competitions next season. So right now Chelsea are in a good place. But I just want to see more variety, more passion in this team again, much like the start of last year. Because not since a 3-1 win over Wolves, again, much like Villa over a month ago, did Chelsea look that impressive to me. And so, this game, right now, for both teams, it's going to come down to how they feel they can compete for top positioning. And right now, Villa playing Liverpool today, tied 2-2 in the 65th minute. If they can get a result out of that, they can clearly go into this weekend's matchup feeling like they have the upper hand against a Chelsea team that might not have a solidified roster that they can believe in, a solidified lineup that they can believe in, week out in the Premier League. And Aston Villa can take advantage of that. But Villa, on the other hand, have to weigh their good form in the Champions League with this form in the Premier League. Because if I'm Villa, I would love to stay at the very least on the periphery of the top 6 to have a chance of competing in Europe again next year. But in the Champions League, you've really been impressive if you're Aston Villa. You have a very impressive result against Bayern early on, and you were able to secure a spot in the last 16 by finishing in the top 8 in the table. So, if I'm Villa, will this game against Chelsea really mean more to me than trying to invest in the Champions League, where, shockingly, you stayed afloat? And Unai Emery, I feel, is more willing to invest in cup competitions, especially competitions like Europa and the Champions League, to further promote this Aston Villa team as a threat and a contender in those competitions. So, even though this game against Liverpool can hold a weight heading into that matchup against Chelsea if they get a good result right now, I also think that if I'm Unai Emery and I'm this Aston Villa organization, I would say in the Premier League, not necessarily to focus on trying to stay pace with the top 6, but also think about how we can compete in the Champions League. Because Villa are a team to me that really could be a contender to usurp some of these big 6 teams. But it's going to heavily depend on their balance. Because right now, their balance is slowly starting to wane. And it's starting to affect how we view them as a European threat in the long-term future. And that loss of Duran really did them no favors either. So if I'm Villa heading into this game, I'm saying we're going to try and get a result as best we can, but let's also consider where we are internationally in cup competitions. And if I'm Chelsea, I'm thinking of this as, well, we really don't necessarily feel like we should compete in the Europa Conference League. It would be nice to win, and we just want to develop as many players as we can, try and find a concrete starting 11 where we feel like we have the pieces we need, but also heading into the summer can add to these guys as well. So this game may not be as, dominant for Chelsea as it was the last time, but it's going to be a game that could be integral to how these teams view their chances in the Premier League, not just in the short term, but the long term as well. But let me know what you think in the comments below, because that will just about do it for today's show. This has been the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I've been your host, Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow, same time as always, 2:55 p.m. Eastern. I'm out for today, though. See y'all tomorrow.